All right. So now that we are getting more comfortable with going back and forth between fractions and decimals, let's just recap. How would we write these as fractions? So we have, again, we say it, 7/10 because we know it's in the tenths place value. So 7/10, 4/10, 3/10, and 1/10. But what happens when it's not a denominator of 10? What happens when it's not a tenth? So let's take a quick look at something that's more familiar. And how would we write that as a fraction? Well, we can see that that's a half. And although this might be a familiar number that most of you can already jump to, though this is 0.5, 0.5, but how does it become that? Well, if we section this into tenths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, assuming that that was equal sections, we now have 10 sections, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colored in. So this is where our equivalent fractions tie in, that a half is equivalent to 5/10, which is both of these are written as 0.5, 5/10. So my advice is to become comfortable with all of the denominators that easily can become a 10 or 100. So we call these the factors of 100. So 5, 10, 20, 25. So 2 can become 100 easily by multiplying by 50. 5 can become 100 by multiplying by what number? Good, 20. 10 times 10 becomes 100. 20 times, you just said it, 5 becomes 100. And 25 times 4 becomes 100, which means we forgot a factor, 4. 4 times 25. So these are key numbers to think about, that if you ended up with a fraction like 3/4 and you want it and you don't know how to make that a decimal, well, let's make it an equivalent fraction, being 100 as our base. 4 times 25 gives us 100. So 3 times 25 gives us 75, which means our decimal is 0.75. All right, so some of this is a little bit more advanced, but it's all about getting comfortable. The more you practice, the more comfortable you get with it. So equivalent fractions, and then making decimals out of denominators of 10 and denominators of 100 is your goal. This is denominators of 10 is grade 4, and denominators of 100 is technically grade 5, but it's hard to separate them out, especially when you guys are expected to know money, which uses 100. So that's why I'm including both of them. Now, fractions is not only money, and I want you to think about if we had a clock, and if we had half of the clock, or if it was a half past, and let's say it was, so that means it was 3:30, right? Half our clock. How many minutes is a half? Well, it's 30 minutes. So it's still half, as in 0.5 of an hour, but the value there is not 50, it's 30, because our whole is 60 minutes, right? 60 minutes is the denominator now, whereas before with money, the denominator was 100 out of $1. Our whole is now out of 60 minutes, or it could be out of 12 hours. So depending on what it is, if you're talking about a measuring cup, right? A measuring cup, its whole is 250 milliliters. So half of that would be much different. It wouldn't be, it would still be 50% or 0.5, but its value would be 125 milliliters. So again, look around your house. There are fractions everywhere. We've got time, we've got measuring cups, drill bits and screwdrivers. Those all have measurements of fractions and decimals on them. All right, so now let's do some practicing. On a piece of paper, or if you want to use the math extension, Equatio, and do it on a Google Doc, that's fine, but this is what you're going to submit in the Google form. So what is the decimal for 3/10, 7/10, 10/10? What about 0.4? Write that as a fraction. 0.6, 0.8. So writing as decimals, writing as fractions, and then also, what about 2/5, 3/5, 4/5? Oh, let's just do 1/5, because we've done a half a lot. So this is where you are going to need to make an equivalent fraction. We want it out of 10, then you will easily be able to know the denominator. Well, how do you make it out of 10? You are going to, whether you like circles or squares, take your fifths, 3, 4, 5. And if I have 2/5, and now how do I make these into tenths? Well, I'm going to split it in half to make tenths. Now how many out of 10 is colored in? That is going to be your decimal. So how many out of 10? And make your conversions. So you can pause it here to work on these, or go over to the Google Doc, and these will be the questions to submit, in your Google form.